All right, I am pressing the button. Insofar as I know, we are live now.
Okay. All right, guys. Well, in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and call to order here. So thanks for everyone for coming out tonight. It's been a while since we've seen everybody, but it's good to have as many people as we can get out. I think we lost Tony there for a little bit, but I think he's just popped back in. There we go. Perfect. Perfect. So tonight what we'll do is we're just going to do a couple of updates just about our process, update on our portal as well that is opened up, or we'll call it version 2 of our portal. And then we have our partners here from the Tufts lab that'll be providing us with a little bit more detailed information about some of the maps that all the commissioners have sent in and some of the maps that we've gotten from the community too. And then about some specifics about the VRA, the Voting Rights Act, and how our process will include that as well. And so we'll go ahead and do a roll call. And so when I say your name, if you could, just please say present. So from the 1st Congressional District, Commissioner Tobias.
Yes, present.
All right. Commissioner Anthony from the 2nd Congressional District.
Present.
Okay. Commissioner McClellan from the 3rd.
Present.
Okay. Commissioner Rangel from the 4th Congressional District.
Present.
All right. Commissioner Ram from the 5th.
Present.
All right. And I didn't see Melissa here, but we'll come back to her, as well as Jason. Commissioner Bissonette will not be with us today. Commissioner Phillips from the 8th Congressional District.
Here, present.
All right. Okay. So we'll keep an eye out for Melissa if she makes it. I don't know if she could make it today, but otherwise, again, with the most recent updates that we have coming out, we just received some information as a commission about the update specifically for the portal itself and how we'll kind of be wrapping some of the old submissions into it. And for anyone watching, thanks so much for submitting all of your maps and your communities of interest. And please continue to do so as we go through the process. But I'll turn it over to Jack just for a quick overview of the portal, and we'll go from there.
Well, I had planned on just giving you a little update. I know you all know the portal went live a few weeks ago, the new portal. I think it looks great, so big props to MGGG for helping us with that and putting that together, essentially. I had planned on giving you a little update about what submissions were made, and then I learned a few days ago that Liz at MGGG was going to put together this great report that was emailed to you all today, detailing exactly what submissions we've received and who we've gotten them from and where we've gotten them from, and needed some of the content is summarized. So if you haven't taken a look at that, I guess I'll just quickly give you the top line, which is that in the time that since the new portal's launched, looks like we've gotten 43 written comments, 18 district maps or full or partial district maps, and 92 COI maps, communities of interest. Correct me if I'm wrong, Liz, but I don't think these include what was previously submitted through our old website. So go ahead, I see you unmuted.
That's right. It right now only has the ones that were submitted when it was launched the second week of June. And so in the old portal, we're going to have to transfer over, I think, 145 COI maps. And there's, I think, about 18 plans to transfer over.
Great. So that I bring that up just to say that though I think these numbers are encouraging for the amount of time the portal's been live, it's not all we have. That those submissions aren't like lost or anything. We still have them. And so to the extent that we get them transferred over so they're visually seeable on the new portal, that'll be great. But even if not, they will be considered in the overall product that eventually you all make. So I don't have anything else I was going to share. I invite Liz or Moon to share anything else about the portal. Oh, one more thing, just that we have shared this report with Fair Maps Coalition people, and we're going to share it with anybody who asks for it, both because it's record and we'll share it with anybody who asks for it, but also we're appreciative of anybody out there who might be listening who can look at this and say, well, hey, my community's not on there, and I'd like it to be seen. So you guys should all feel free to encourage people in the area. Well, encourage people anywhere, but also in the areas on the map that don't have communities submitted to submit communities. So that's all I've got for that portion of the meeting. But like I said, take a look at that report if you haven't seen it. And my understanding is we'll be getting these weekly or close to weekly. So I'll always forward them along to you guys. So.
Actually, weekly on Wednesdays is the plan.
Weekly on Wednesdays. I didn't want to promise on somebody else's behalf, but I'm
going to
certain
be
that's
so
what you're
bold as to promise you weekly on Wednesdays. And actually, if you would, we thought that one thing we'd do is have Liz just sort of walk you through this report and talk about the process of reading everything and synthesizing it in a human readable way. So Liz, if is it a good time to do that? Jeff?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Oh, great. So Liz, if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and share your screen and walk us through this.
Sure. Okay, so if y'all have been sent the PDF, then it should look just like this. Can everyone see my screen? Okay, great. So right at the top, we just have a table summarizing what we've seen week by week. So week 1 starts June 7th, and then week 4 ends this past Sunday on July 4th. And then just like Jack said, we saw 43 written comments, 18 districting plans, and then 92 community of interest maps. So that's when someone actually submits a districtor link to us with boundaries and a description and maybe some landmarks. So the written testimony we read and kind of dropped them into 2 different buckets. Theory of gerrymandering, which is if someone writes about the principles or processes that they think represent fair redistricting. And then besides theory, there's also a community of interest bucket. So that's someone describing their community or giving some guidance to the line drawing process, like Brown County, for example, should be kept together in the congressional plan. So we categorize those as communities of interest and potentially might reach out to these people to see if they want to submit a community of interest map so they can be considered in that kind of boundary process. But so for the written piece here, not everything is going to add up perfectly to this totals column because there are some that don't necessarily fit into either category. For example, I think about 6 submissions referenced a map, but then I didn't actually submit a link. So those kind of didn't fall into either category. But then the districts over here, those should all add up to the total. And then as far as overall themes, we definitely saw a lot of community of interest maps, which I thought was a little surprising based on some of the other states where we're working, where written comment usually seems to be the most common form of public submission that we're seeing. And there haven't been that many comments on any of the submissions that we've seen so far. But some of the common keywords that we see appearing again and again are schools and school districts, county, lots of reference to fair or unfair, references to gerrymandering. Milwaukee and Madison also came up a lot. And then just hopping down here, we did a week by week summary where we tried to pull out some kind of themes and interesting examples that y'all might want to take a look at as you're going through the portal and looking at the different submissions. So in the first week, someone, for example, submitted a really detailed explanation about the process they used for drawing congressional districts. So we called that out as something that you might want to look at in more detail. And then in week 2, I'll just say in the written testimony, we saw a lot of references to and concerns about partisanship and gerrymandering and representation. But some folks also were mentioning preserving communities of interest, the importance of city and county boundaries. 2 folks referenced interest in competitive elections. 1 person mentioned drawing compact districts. And then there were a couple of references to algorithms and computer generated maps. But I think as far as things to highlight, those are kind of just the high points. And then if you scroll to the bottom here, we included some coverage maps. So we'll update these every Monday. So this top set of images is just the week submissions. So this is week 4. And then the bottom images here show all of the submissions to date. So you can see these hotspots kind of popping up in southern Wisconsin, particularly around the Milwaukee area. And then if you scroll down, we zoom in specifically to get a better look at some of the communities of interest that have been submitted in the Milwaukee area. Specifically, overall, there are 33 community boundaries that have been submitted there. So that's kind of a quick rundown of the report. And then every Wednesday we'll be updating this with the latest week.
So if I could jump in with some requests for you, commissioners, it would be, first of all, tell us where you want insets. If there are parts of the state, and they don't have to be, the sort of bigger cities, they could just be a part of the state where you really want to focus on outreach. So you ask us to do an inset for that part of the state. And then every week's report will just show you what came in that week in that window. So letting us know where you're particularly interested in tracking, as individuals or as subgroups of commissioners, that'll help us give you the most useful possible report. A second way that I suggest you use this report, so as Liz was paging through, you saw some examples in there. So notice that those are live links. And the hope is that you'll click on those, it'll take you to the submission, and you'll be able to kind of see the expanded view of exactly what folks were trying to tell you. So, that was a kind of interesting piece of the processing task for us. It's been great to read these and kind of get a real feeling from states around the country of the kinds of things that are on people's minds and to see what drives whole groups of submissions to appear kind of clustered together thematically or in place. So the hope is that you'll use this as a jumping off point for exploring what's in the portal. And you can see under recurrent themes here, Liz has identified some keywords that came up a lot. In the portal, there's an advanced search feature, and I'll just remind you how to find that. Go to portal, some mapping. /search. So this should be the advanced search feature. Let's make sure I typed that right. Yeah, looks like I did. And you can do your own keyword searches from here and sort the plans by type and start to get a feeling for what's in here. We've made the cards that represent individual submissions pageable. So if you're in the detail page for a card, you can go to next and previous and just sort of start rolling up your sleeves and getting to know what people are trying to tell you. So our hope is that in shifting to this new portal format, it gives you a much more friendly, browsable tool, and you can use our report as a jumping off point to go explore on your own.
Well, just really quickly, I know you guys will be sending it out. Is that the same info that's accessible by the link that was sent out with the first email with the box.com, I think is where it sends us?
Yeah, so we're providing, and we're still getting kind of our routine up and running for the weekly handover, but we're providing 2 links. One is a box that will be accessible to the public, to anyone that you share the link with. You can either take the contents and repost them on the commission website, or you can just feel free to share the link. And that will be all the public facing information. So that includes not only these reports, but also a full spreadsheet database with everything public facing that's been submitted to the portal. We'll be providing you a second password protected link just for the commission and commission staff. The only difference is that that will include contact information for the people who submitted. So that is presumably to be redacted from the public, but that's so that you, for the folks who submitted to the portal and checked the box that says you're welcome to contact me with follow-up questions, it's to enable you to do that.
I have a question. Yeah, Moon, could you expand on, you said you wanted us to give you feedback on the incense area. I mean, are you saying like areas that we think are underrepresented in the COIs, or, and then the second part of that is how do you reach out and try to help us?
Yeah, so it could be an area that you're concerned will be underrepresented, or just, in your case, Tony, from the 8th district, just be an area that you have like particular connections to, organizations and community groups that, if not enough stuff is going in, you can reach out to partner organizations and say, hey, it's time to mobilize. We need to hear from this part of the state. So we're open to whatever you want to see as insets. Again, they could be rural regions, they could be urban areas, any place that you particularly want to keep an eye on. We're already finding hotspots and giving you insets where we locate hotspots, but we also want to be responsive to you and the areas of the state that you want to keep an eye on. Great. I'll mention one more thing. So we have a sort of data science process that's kicking into gear. We have a great faculty team of collaborators that we're working with from some institutions around the country. And we've started to think about how we're going to try to take all of this raw information about COIs and synthesize it for you, because as they start to come in by the dozens and with some luck by the hundreds, you're going to want some way to summarize everything that you've seen. And so we'll be looking for clusters, both clusters in terms of the keywords and the narrative content, the way people are talking about their community, and geographic kind of spatial clusters where you see some of the same terms coming up frequently in a particular part of the state. So you should expect that we'll be kind of folding this into our reports over the coming weeks, some summary for you of things that you might not see with the naked eye as there start to be more and more of these submissions, but that we can detect with analytic techniques are starting to become themes in the feedback that you're getting. Hi, Ben.
Yeah. Hello. This is amazing. Thank you for all your work on this. The report looks very thorough, so appreciate that. This question might be for maybe more so Jack or Maddie. I'm wondering, are these reports, or can these reports, the public-facing ones, be available online in on our website in a timely fashion?
That is definitely our plan. I don't know if Maddie is, I know Maddie's on the meeting. I don't know if she's available to speak, but either way, that's definitely our plan. And certainly going forward, truth be told, I'm not in Madison right now. I'm on vacation otherwise, other than this meeting. So I think it's very important. I made sure to forward on to you guys. It will get on the website. And I think every Wednesday from here on outward, we'll make that a point to do right away. And it's especially thanks to Moon, we don't have to do any sifting through it. The report, we can put it right on the website, since it doesn't have all the stuff that we typically redact from records, such as things that people can be hassled with, such as their phone number. So yeah, I think it's a clear yes. And I see Maddie shaking her head. So yes, we'll have these on the website ASAP. And just for anybody out there listening, everything that's there, though not in such a synthesized, nice manner, is also available at portal.wisconsin.gov. So it's all the same information. I still think it's a great question, Ben. I just want to point out that this is all public as we speak. It's just not in such a pretty format necessarily. So
yeah, well, thank you for that, Jack and Maddie. And I think it could also be some parts of the report could be good to share on Twitter too, if our Twitter is still active. I think I saw some tweets over the last few weeks, so that would be a good space for it too.
Will do. Thank you.
Great.
Awesome. Well, Mona, the next agenda point, the next two bullet points are from your lab, so feel free to take the mic.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the next thing I wanted to talk to you about is a little bit of process. And we had started the last time I joined you in a meeting to talk about how we could supply examples of maps with particular properties. So I want to give you an update on the kind of algorithmic generation of maps that you should think of as starting points, just as starting points for your investigation and the kind of things that you can learn from those. So I will do two things. First of all, I will share with you in the chat the link. Let's make sure I spelled everything right. Yeah, that looks right. PMC districts. And so this is where, when on an ongoing basis, we're going to keep asking you, what would you like to see next? And we're going to keep generating districts that have examples of certain kinds of properties and posting them for you to explore. So today I just want to give you an update on the second round of generated maps that we found and some observations from making them, and then really ask you for your help in coming up with what you'd like to see in the next round. So here's where we've started the kind of iterative process where we make some maps that have properties that answer to your criteria. And then you say a little more of this and a little less of that, and we tweak them and try to find kind of rounds of maps for you to look at. My understanding is that the commission's in the process of hiring a line drawer, and that once that person is onboarded, we'll be working with the line drawer to make this iterative process even more robust. So we'll generate maps, you'll look at them, you'll think about how you want to change them, and then maybe using a kind of interview format, you'll move the lines, the line drawer will help with that and hand them back to us, and we'll have a really productive cycle going where you'll spell out what's important to you, and we'll help you with these algorithmic techniques find maps that fit the bill. I can't say this enough, so I'm going to be repetitive. We're not making maps that you should ever consider just using, right? The point, the spirit of the algorithmic assistance is to kind of turn the knob a little to the left and a little to the right until you are able, with all of your Wisconsin knowledge and your kind of human faculties of judgment, you're able to think about the trade-offs and sort of move your way towards one that meets all your needs. But we're happy to help. A 99 district assembly plan can be pretty intimidating to make from scratch. So we want to supply you with lots of examples as conversation starters and to start the process. Okay, having said that, let me show you some pictures. So, well, I'll do two screen shares. The first thing I will share, if I can pull up the correct thing, is just what that PMC districts page looks like. I think I'm earning an advanced degree in Zoom these days. Okay, so here's the PMC districts page, whose link I dropped into the chat a moment ago. So this page lets you draw your own district starting with a blank map, or lets you start with what's going to be an increasing, like a growing list of sample plans. So far, we're doing assembly districts because those are the hardest to draw from scratch. But ask and ye shall receive. So if you want to see a batch of Senate plans, a batch of congressional plans, those are definitely also easily supplied. Okay, so you see here a bunch of cards showing plans now 1 through 8. And if you click into one of them, first of all, I hope you notice as you look at these, oops, I clicked into one by accident, but they vary in how blockish they look, right? And the reason for that is that we took the different criteria such as county boundaries and dialed up and down the importance that the algorithmic search placed on preserving those lines. So as you can guess from looking, it's not a coincidence that the colors in this map follow county lines so well. It's because this was a search targeted at preserving county lines. Make sense? Okay, so I invite you to check these out. Let me show you some ways that you can explore them from within the interface. I've turned on the county boundaries, but you could also turn on municipalities. You get a busier picture because municipalities, in this case, towns and cities, are smaller, but you can sort of see how good of a job this map does at following those boundaries. Another thing that you can do is take a look at the partisan balance summary. And you can see, for instance, as for the 8 different elections, the 8 different statewide elections that we have loaded onto these precincts, how looking, for example, at the Republican column, how the share of votes that went to Republicans compares to the share of seats that would have been won by Republicans if people voted as they did for governor in 2018. And so you can see in some elections, like the 2018 Senate race, those numbers are very close. That means this is a fairly proportional outcome. This is what's meant by proportionality when these two numbers are close. And sometimes with some patterns of voting, you get a significant disproportion. And sometimes even as in this case, the party that had more votes had fewer seats, right? More than half the votes were Democratic, but for this particular districting plan, 60% of the seats have a Republican majority. So that's how to read this in terms of your criterion of proportionality. Any questions about that? You'll find by looking that this is actually pretty respectable. The fact that you get close to proportionality in 1, 2, 3 of these elections. Proportionality kind of doesn't come for free. So the fact that you're seeing at least 3 elections with fairly proportional outcomes, that's, as they say, not nothing. Okay. Any questions about what you're seeing? One other thing I'll add that you can find in here, you can look at kind of the population by race. In this case, we're comparing white, Latino, and Black population district by district. And so we're going to move to talking about the Voting Rights Act in a moment. And when we do, I will emphasize that these percentages are not the point of the Voting Rights Act. Nonetheless, you can see that they tell you something about whether you have a district that's fairly racially homogeneous, like the 5th district here, which is almost 91% white, according to people's census self-identification, or a district like the one that's numbered 7 here, which you can see is over just about 2/3 Black. Right, so it gives you some sense of the kind of diversity of the districts, and you can page through and kind of get a feeling for how that looks. Any questions? Okay, so my hope.
I have a
please.
question. So in this example and in all the other examples, are the number not corresponding with the actual district number, or are they sort of just arbitrary numbers?
Yeah, good point. They are arbitrary numbers because we made this districting plan from scratch. Gotcha. And so the numbers don't correspond to, they're not like closely matched to the current enacted districts. Gotcha. Now, if this feature, it was broken before, look, it's working again. Yay, technology. Okay. You can turn the numbering on to the districts so that you can kind of find districts. You can see that they're not numbered in any super kind of logical way. Unfortunately, we should probably fix that. But it helps you match up. And as you zoom in to the areas that are denser, once the computer catches up, the numbers will appear once you're zoomed enough in to see them.
And then a second question, do we have a sample map of our current districts, the way they're drawing currently? Yeah. Yes,
absolutely. I'll show you where to find that in a moment.
Thanks.
Yeah, but you're right. I should have added it to this page as well. Good reminder. So I'll just make one more quick mention. As you heard me kind of advertise a moment ago, we aren't proposing at all that you consider these plans for adoption, but rather that you use them as jumping off points. So if this is a part of the state, Slinger's a part of the state that you know well, you might say, oh, I don't really like that boundary. So this is District 89 and this is District 17. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to find 89. If I hover over this, it'll tell me which number it is. I'll select that. And maybe I want to actually add this precinct to District 89. And then I'll go back to 17. And I said district, but I meant ward. Right? I'll add this ward to 89. And then maybe I can add another word to 89, another word to 89. And as I grow it, eventually I'll want to take something away. So I can go back to 17 and maybe swap that out and keep an eye on my population balance and make sure I'm not making anything too far out of whack by doing that. And so this is sort of what the process might look like of taking one of these random sample plans as a jumping off point and then using your local knowledge as well as all the community information that the members of the public are submitting to you to make adjustments to these plans and bring them more in line with your principles. One of my suggestions to you as you bring your line drawer into the fold is that you do this in a kind of interview format where you sit down with someone who's very comfortable manipulating the map and you say a little to the left, a little to the right, and can kind of make changes together without worrying that you're going to break the map.
One last question, and is that portal that you linked us to, the one that you're showing us right now, is the expectation for us to use this as commissioners, or for this to be like public facing too, and for the residents to look at this and use it?
Oh, well, we've intentionally posted it publicly so that members of the public can follow the exercise as well as you can. And so the intention is to have this process be as transparent and public as possible. Great, and please feel free, ask lots of questions, make lots of requests. That's what we're here for. Okay, so if there's nothing else about that for now, I'll shift a little bit over to telling you what is it about those 8 maps that we want you to think about. So I will switch to a different screen share. Okay, and talk a little bit about the properties of these maps. So this is still in progress. Some of these maps are kind of hot off the presses. So the summary here is still in progress, but this will also certainly be publicly shared in the box of materials once it's done. So how were these 8 maps found? Well, maps 1 and 2 were found by only taking into account population balance, compactness, and contiguity. So the random process that was used to make them didn't take anything else into account. Nothing about partisanship, nothing about counties, just these very basic criteria. And everything's population balanced to within 2%, which is a completely legally acceptable standard for assembly maps. Everything's within 2% of ideal size. Although I'll emphasize, as you all know, but it's worth reminding you, this is all with respect to not the new data, because the Census Bureau releases the new data, as you know, in a little more than a month on August 16th. So this whole process can be repeated once we have the new population numbers, but we're getting you comfortable with the process now, we're getting a jump on the process now. Okay, so maps 1 and 2 only pay attention to those basic desiderata. Maps 3, 4, and 5, and as I said, you can really see it reflected in the pictures, they fold in a preference for county integrity. So there's an algorithmic nudge in the direction of keeping counties whole for 3, 4, and 5. Okay, now I'll tell you about 6, 7, and 8, but before I do, let's go to a summary table where we see, and you've seen this, most of this already, but where we see some of the properties. So there are, if you look at the number of split counties, there's 25 counties that must be split because they're larger than an assembly district. And so the goal would be to drive the number of split counties down. You're not going to get all the way to 25, but the goal is to drive it down towards 25. And sure enough, maps 1 and 2, which paid no attention to counties, split more counties, and the maps that had the algorithmic instruction to keep counties whole did so. They did a much better job of preserving the counties intact. That's what you're seeing here. Okay. At the same time, if you look at a compactness score, you'll see that they're not very different. This is the cut edges compactness score, so lower is better. The lower this number is, the prettier the map looks on average. And so you see that's pretty comparable. The preference for county preservation didn't do anything dramatic to the compactness of the map. And then if you look at the party lean, what you see is that the maps really vary, except they're consistent in one way. They all kind of, in terms of who has the majority in more districts, all the maps that we've found so far with these ensembles, in the aggregate over the 8 elections present in districtor, they're somewhat Republican favoring because that's the landscape of the state. A proportional map would have a slight Democratic advantage over those 8 elections. So it would give 49.5% of the seats to Republicans. But all of these maps are a little bit more Republican favoring than that. Here's the interesting thing. Notice the split towns column. So from the last time that we met with the line drawers, there was a request to explore finding maps that preserved towns and not just counties, paying attention to the integrity of the cities and towns. So there are 1,922 towns in Wisconsin, and many of them are very small. Some of them are cities and are quite big. And so you want to split as few as possible. And something kind of interesting can be observed here. So just by preserving counties, it drives down the number of split towns. That's not too surprising because towns nest inside counties for the most part, right? What was really interesting and surprising for us, and like I said, this is kind of hot off the presses, is that when we changed the algorithmic instructions to preserve towns, it did not have the effect of keeping the county splits low. This isn't a huge surprise. If you ask me, it's a moderate surprise that town integrity doesn't bring county integrity along for the ride. So a next generation search might be something that tries to balance both of those priorities, keeping both towns and counties whole, even though in some sense that's going to trade off against each other. Do you have any questions about that so far?
Well, Moon, you just stole my question.
Okay.
Is it possible to combine, and by the way, thank you for these maps. It's much appreciated. But is it possible to look for a map that both splits counties the least and splits towns the least?
It is. And after we saw these results, which surprised me a little bit, which said the split counties numbers for these is just as bad as if you didn't pay attention to counties at all. That surprised me. Once we saw that, we came up with a new idea for an algorithmic modification that will take them both into account. So I'm pretty optimistic that the next round of maps will look better on both of those counts simultaneously. But this is exactly our ask to you as you think about the complexity of all your different criteria. Ask us what to layer in. And we'll try to keep generating examples that, walk and chew gum at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, we can see what other commissioners think, but I think I've been hearing more about county splits than anything. So I'd probably lean toward less county splits overall, but we can see if we can find maps that do both.
Yeah, and I think it might be particular to some towns, whether or not they feel a shared sense of community amongst a few towns or if they're very different. But my question was related to a comment that we received, a public comment sent to us related to the population deviation percentage.
Mhm.
And I know in our criteria, we had something around like 1%, but you had mentioned that some of these algorithms targeted less than 2%. And way back in some of our expert testimony, we heard about different states doing population deviation differently.
Mhm.
I guess I would just be curious, like, what would be the legal boundary of population deviation? Not necessarily ignoring our criteria, but just like looking at a map, like, could we have really low county and town splits if we were around a 5% deviation for population? Like,
Oh,
or is that too much?
That's a great point. You're definitely right that if we loosen the threshold for population deviation, that's going to help us drive these split numbers down. And so that's a decision for you all to make. I'll tell you or remind you that nationally, the common practice is that the top to bottom deviation for legislative districts shouldn't exceed 10% unless you have a compelling reason, state interest. By having these within 2% of ideal, that means the top to bottom is no more than 4%. So this is considerably tighter than what the law allows. And so that's definitely a good call, Ben. If you want to see if we can drive those split numbers lower by relaxing the population deviation, that would be a great thing to ask, and we'll go ahead and give that a try.
It might be interesting to eventually have both options to present to the public. Like, look, this is, if we stay traditional, the 1 or 2%, this is the best we can generate. If we're willing to relax that 1 criteria, here's what we can do. I mean, it'd be very educational, and
I think that's a really interesting thing to explore. Be happy to take a look at that.
Can I ask just, Moon, it's Howard Bellman, just a simple definitional question. When you use the term town, are you talking about, is that a generic term for municipalities? Because we have towns, villages, and cities here.
It is a generic term for municipalities.
Okay,
Wisconsin is one of about 6 states that has the property that there's no kind of unincorporated territory. Every part of Wisconsin belongs to a municipality, to something that's in this shapefile I'm calling towns. If you're curious, like New England, New York, and Wisconsin are the main examples in the country. And so that's what's meant by towns here. We used a shapefile from the Census Bureau, which is called county subunits. And in the case of Wisconsin, this corresponds to municipalities, and it's what you can see. I'll switch back my screen, but thank you for asking. I'll switch that back to the other screen I was showing you a moment ago, if I can find it. It is. And if we zoom out, so what I'm calling towns there is exactly what shows up as municipalities in this boundary layer.
So it would be villages and cities as well as towns.
That's right. I think in some technical, we have a sort of geographer who works with us in our lab. And in some states, these are called townships.
Right.
There's at least some context in Wisconsin in which they're called towns. But I agree with you, they're municipalities. They include villages, cities, and towns. And they cover the state completely.
Right. Oh,
I
thank you.
don't think you're showing the screen.
Oh, really? Okay.
Well, you're showing a screen. I don't know if it was the
Just
right
when
one.
I said I was good at Zoom, I lied, obviously.
Maybe that was the right one, and I was misinterpreting what you were trying to
Oh,
display.
no, I'm sure it wasn't. Is that better?
Yeah, you weren't sure on that one before. Yep. Okay. And that's just straight from the Census Bureau.
Straight from the Census Bureau. These are the county subunits of Wisconsin.
It looks like Emery has a question. Emery, you got something? before I ask
Yeah,
you?
just a couple of things. I was wondering if it's easy to determine how many what we're calling towns actually are on county lines. I know there's a number of them. That would just be kind of good baseline knowledge. And then in that table of metrics that you had, can you remind us what that greater than 40% POC column is?
Absolutely. And that's like ad hoc, and it's in there just to get a conversation started, and it can be replaced by any statistic that you want. Let me pull that back up. So here, this is just the number, and I didn't finish filling this out because, hot off the presses, as we heard. This is just the number of the 99 districts that are greater than 40% non-white by census definition. And the only reason to include 40, it's completely arbitrary. It was just so as not to include 50, because I want to remind you, and again, we're about to shift and talk about the VRA more pointedly, but there's a widespread misconception that the Voting Rights Act requires majority minority districts. And so 40 is just a number that's not 50 to sort of break the habit of thinking about majority minority districts as what's called for by the Voting Rights Act. But, ask for a different statistic here in place of this, and we'll be happy to compute it.
Yeah, well, on that, what does a statistic look like that is more in line with the language around the VRA? So I remember candidate of choice being what the VRA uses. Are you even able to show that?
Yes, and I will show you that now. So we've been hard at work. I'm going to show you a VRA dashboard, which I think I showed you many months ago, but we've expanded it a little bit. And the next state in the queue for the VRA dashboard is Wisconsin. So we've been processing all the enormous pile of data necessary to do this for Wisconsin. But I want to show it to you now with a couple of other states prepared to show you a little bit about VRA. And so it's very important, before I go any further, to issue the reminder that I am not an attorney. And so I'm a mathematician who is lawyer adjacent. I collaborate with a number of civil rights lawyers. But what I'm giving you is kind of a lay interpretation of the VRA and a computational software tool that we've built to help you understand it. Okay, so here's just a quick primer on some very basic things that the Voting Rights Act does and does not say. And tell me at any point if you want more or less detail, and that would be absolutely fine. So the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965. And over the years, as the case law evolved around using the VRA, there were two key sections that you heard about all the time, Section 2 and Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. Section 2 broadly prohibits devices or practices that deny or abridge the vote on account of race. And over the years, that evolved to include not just its original conception, which was mainly thought of as African-American voters, but other kinds of racial minorities and ultimately language minorities as well. So people who speak a common language that isn't English would be covered by the provisions of the Voting Rights Act. Section 5 took parts of the country and put them in a regime called pre-clearance, where to change their districting plan or any laws to do with voting, the pre-clearance areas had to get prior approval from the federal government, either the DC Circuit Court or the Department of Justice. As many of you know, in 2013, not that long ago, the list of places that was covered by pre-clearance was emptied. So we still have a Section 5, but it applies to essentially nowhere. There's still a way that places can like bail in, it's called, re-qualify for pre-clearance coverage, but generally pre-clearance was kind of ended by the Shelby v. Holder decision in 2013. Section 2 is still in place, and this round of redistricting is very much subject to Section 2. So what does Section 2 say, and how should you think about it? What it doesn't say is that you have to draw majority minority districts. I think I've probably made that point enough times. So what it does say is that a districting plan can be challenged. You can have litigation against a plan if it fails to secure opportunity to elect candidates of choice for qualifying minority groups. And so just super briefly, what does it take to qualify? In other words, who can bring a suit? Who can be a plaintiff? Who can bring a Voting Rights Act case? So a minority group has to pass some threshold tests. It has to be possible for them to be the majority of a district, right? Okay, so this sounds like it's at odds with what I was saying a moment ago, that the VRA doesn't make you draw majority minority districts, but you do, to bring a case, you have to show that it's possible. In other words, if you have a group that's dispersed all the way across your state, but it's not concentrated anywhere, they can't bring a VRA lawsuit. They're not numerous enough and compact enough to control a district. So that's called the first jingles factor, jingles 1. So a group has to be large enough and they have to live closely enough to possibly control a district, to be more than 50% of a district. Next, there has to be a demonstration of racially polarized voting. In other words, that group has to have some candidates that they prefer, but the majority doesn't share the preference and it blocks the preferences of the group. And so, for instance, here we are in Louisiana, and if you scroll down, what we've done is we've looked at a suite of recent elections in Louisiana, and we've used statistical techniques to decide who is the Black candidate of choice in each of these elections. So John Bell Edwards, who's the sitting governor of Louisiana, is the Black candidate of choice. This is telling you we're 100% sure, no ambiguity in the statistical methods. We know that that was the preferred candidate of Black voters. This is telling you that he's not himself Black, he's white, as it turns out. This was quite a recent election, and we combine all those factors to give a certain weight to that election. Okay, so step 1 to understand your VRA obligations is to figure out, for the different minority groups in Wisconsin, which you'll look at first one at a time. You'll look at Black voters, you'll look at Latino voters, and we'll do this analysis where we run what's called ecological inference and tell you who we think is the Black candidate of choice, who's the Latino candidate of choice, who's the Native American candidate of choice, and any other groups that you ask us to look at. And we've already prepared a sort of database that has all the information that we need, including from primary elections, to be able to be pretty confident of, at least for the large enough groups, who we think is the candidate of choice. Okay, great. And so if your group is numerous enough and lives in a compact enough arrangement, and if voting is racially polarized, then the VRA is in play. Okay, so your question is, how do you ensure that for qualifying groups that you're drawing a districting plan that gives enough opportunity to elect? So let's take a look. Let's look, for instance, oops, no, not at that, but instead let's look at the current enacted plan. So here are the 3 current enacted plans in Louisiana. So if we look at the state Senate plan, and actually Louisiana is a good example because many of you did a homework assignment where you tried districting Louisiana for yourselves. So here's what we think is the effectiveness of each of these districts for Black voters. And so there's a paper that's about to be published in the Election Law Journal that explains the methodology that we use to come up with these, but I want to give you an idea. So let's pick a district. Let's, for instance, take one of these Baton Rouge districts. So I'll take a look at district number 14, just one of these Baton Rouge districts. And this is telling me that district is 98.1% likely to perform for the Black, the statewide minority. So why? If I go down to the district's details, I can look up District 14 and I can see here was the Black candidate of choice, and they would have won or placed second in every single one of the primary elections. And that means that that Black candidate of choice would have advanced out of the primary to the general election in every single election in our data set. This is what's called effectiveness. What we're not asking is, are there a lot of Black people here? Instead, what we're asking is, does the Black candidate of choice win the district? That's electoral history, not just demographics. Everybody okay with that? And then we advance to the general elections and we see, look at that perfect string of success. The Black candidate of choice wins in every single one of the general elections. By the way, the reason there are some NAs here is that Louisiana has a kind of jungle primary situation where if someone gets a statewide majority in the first round, they don't have to advance to a second round. So some of these don't have a general election. Okay, great. And then by contrast, if I look at a neighboring district, so let me grab one over here. So here's District 17. And if I drop down to District 17, I see quite a different story. I see that the Black candidate of choice, so green means that they would have advanced. So they only advance in, about half of the primaries, and they don't do very well in the generals either. And so this district is going to be rated fairly ineffective for Black voters because it's fairly hard for the Black candidate of choice to be nominated and elected out of this district using these elections as a basis for that conclusion. So if I go back up to the table, I'll see District 17. We think that's only 17.7% likely to perform based on these outcomes. Okay, that was kind of a lot in 5-ish minutes. So here's the takeaway. VRA obligations aren't about hitting a certain percentage of residents that belong to a minority. They're about whether you can demonstrate using electoral history that the candidates of choice are going to often enough make it through the primary and the general election. Susan.
I'm curious, is there like a third party group or entity that certifies maps for this?
Yeah, great.
And how does that work? And how would we be evaluated essentially?
Well, so in the olden days of pre-clearance, the Department of Justice reviewed a lot of maps to pre-clear them. So before all the covered jurisdictions could enact a new map, they had to submit it for approval. These days, line drawers often bring in a VRA expert at their own expense to consider the map and do this kind of analysis for them. My lab has built the tool that you're looking at to kind of democratize the ability to make that judgment call for yourself. Right.
Okay.
So,
but there isn't another entity that is certifying that the data and your methodology and all those things are sound.
Yeah. So we're using the sort of peer review system. So the paper that this methodology is based on is appearing in the election law journal. So in academia, and actually also in litigation, peer review is considered a mechanism by which methodologies are kind of tested and vetted. And one of the co-authors on the paper is a Department of Justice veteran, civil rights attorney. So having said that, I want to emphasize to you how complex and multi-layered VRA litigation is. And so I would say there are kind of no certainties when it comes to inoculating yourself from VRA liability, but there are kind of best practices. And this is an attempt not to have a computer be your lawyer, because that's never going to work, but to give you the tools to make a judgment call about effectiveness and opportunity. And I appreciate that that's not as cut and dried of an answer as like might be ideal.
Okay, and just a quick follow-up. So let's say another party is drawing a map. Would we be able to do our own VRA interpretation of it using the software of the maps that may be submitted from the other side, if you will?
That's exactly what this is for, is so that maps that are put out, say, by the legislature or by other interested parties can be loaded in and evaluated in these terms.
Okay. Thank you.
I hope I've caveated enough that there's a lot of gray area when it comes to VRA, and a map that could withstand VRA challenge in one court, might not in another court. It's a really hotly contested area of the law. But we do think this tool exposes to you the raw materials that go into making that determination.
Would you mind going back to that evaluation tab?
Absolutely.
It was what was the tab that showed the percentage of effect, like which districts were that one? Yeah. So, is there so in terms of effectiveness, I see a lot of them are either in the high 90s or
Yes.
low. Could you explain, like, is there
Absolutely.
an incentive to have it like 55% effective? Because that means it's still, but I guess I might be getting confused.
No, I'm so glad you
terms of the
noticed.
data, yeah.
That's a great observation. It's almost as though this map has some districts that are designed to be like packed, you might say, in a way that's like hyper performance, while there's very little, as you noted, if you scan down this list, the enacted plan has very little kind of gray area, right? If you yourself draw a district from scratch, you're likely to draw districts that fall in between. But it's a kind of hallmark. And actually, let's check. We should be able to see here, if we look at voting age population by race, take a look at the Black voting age population across these districts. And you'll see that there's quite a few at or near 50%. And then there's a big gap. Here's one in the 30s. But for the most part, you're not seeing a whole lot in the 30s and 40s. And that's definitely just a feature of design. The folks who sat down and drew this map pushed some up over 50%, and others are kind of significantly lower than that. All I can say about that is if you look at enacted plans around the country, you'll see, perhaps especially in the South, this is a characteristic pattern of some districts that are heavily African-American, and then others that are kind of below the level of influence or likely opportunity. Right, and actually you can see a really striking example of that in the congressional plan in Louisiana. So let's take a look at that plan. So Louisiana has a 6-district congressional plan. Oops, did I load it? No, I loaded a blank plan just for fun. Here's the actual enacted plan. Okay, so I think a couple things should jump out at you as you look at this. This yellow district is really not compact, right? And so what's going on is that it has a lot of New Orleans, and then it runs up along these river parishes and connects to a part of Baton Rouge. And if you go ahead and look at the voting age population, you'll see that characteristic pattern I just mentioned. So this one's up near 60% Black voting age population, and then nothing else touches 35. Some would say this is packing of Black voters into a district, and then a depressed opportunity in the other districts nearby. And if you go to the effectiveness overview, right, the District 2 is 98.1% likely to perform, and the other districts are very unlikely to perform according to their electoral history, right? You can sort of page through them and see why. So, right, as you look at District 1, you see no success in generals for the Black candidate of choice, whereas District 2, quite a different story.
And so this map was upheld by the, like, this was okay legally?
Yes.
Despite the
so
packing of Black voters?
Yeah. And so one question you could ask is, what would be necessary in order to challenge this map? So it would have been necessary, this is a kind of interesting point. It would have been necessary to show that it's possible to make a second majority Black district, right? Because that first jingles factor actually requires a majority. And so the threshold condition for bringing a lawsuit requires majority Black in this case, since we're talking about Black voters. So even though it's possible to make a second effective district, you still might not have a VRA case, right? And again, I'll say for the umpteenth time, this is a lay understanding of the legal situation here. And I encourage you to bring in civil rights attorneys' perspectives as well. I'm sure there are many who would be delighted to come and speak to the commission with greater level of professional expertise on this point.
I guess the other side, just to play devil's advocate, Moon, would be, you know, if we run into the issue, let's say if we were doing this objectively and then we run into the issue, are we diluting, or are we cracking those populations too, right? So are we decreasing the representation if we put them in other buckets with, you know, non-African-American voters? So.
Yeah, something that I think is important to keep in mind is that if it were possible to draw more districts that are effective, you may not have a kind of legal requirement to do so, but you may proactively choose to seek more effective districts than are like required by VRA litigation. And that's a question for you as a commission and for your interpretation of your criteria. Are you trying to maximize opportunity or to maximize your kind of to minimize your exposure to VRA liability? And you can do both at the same time. I am just here to raise the questions for you.
Any other questions for?
Okay, now you got your mathematician's interpretation of the law in hand.
Oh, sorry. What's the timeline on the Wisconsin VRA assessment?
Yeah, so I think I've been sort of pushing on getting the VRA dashboard up for you. My best guess is that it will be up within the next week, but I think I've been saying that sentence for a while. It's quite hard to get the data together. I mean, there's a lot of data under the hood, and you want to get it lined up and kind of in really great shape so that the tool is as accurate as possible. So I hope to get that to you within the next week.
Awesome. All right. I think our next topic, if you're done from that end, is just kind of like the general timeline, just kind of what we're doing as soon as, you know, we get that data in August and time lead up until then.
Yeah, so the next big step, and Jack, I think addressed this at the beginning, is getting that line drawer in place. That's the missing piece here. But we don't need to wait for that person to start the iterative process that I've been talking about. So this is an open request to you, and for the folks who are listening on the live stream, think about this too and submit your suggestions to the portal. That's what it's up for. But what kinds of things do you want to see as we search for example plans? Do you want to continue seeing assembly plans? Do you want to see some Senate plans? And what kind of properties would you like to find? As you kind of give us more ideas about things that would be interesting, we can do more runs, and each time we meet, have a fresh batch of maps to compare. Also coming up soon, one of the exciting things about having a portal where the public can submit districting plans and having districting plans that you, the commissioners, made, is that as we start to get enough of those, we'll be able to fold those into the comparisons. And so you'll get to see kind of how you stack up against the algorithms and the public, and you'll sort of get to see the full range of what people and computers are drawing.
I have a question on that in terms of how do we best give you feedback on the iterative or algorithmic plans? I mean, I think, you don't want to hear from every commissioner. So I think what we need to do is meet as subcommittees and decide what are the questions that we have for you. But then do we communicate with you directly, Moon, or is it better to communicate with Liz? What's the most effective way to both communicate and then get a response?
Well, I'll say Liz is about 1,000,000 times better at email than I am, but it'd be great if you reach out to both of us. Yeah, and we'd be happy to hear from you directly. So far what I've heard tonight is that it would be interesting to, which we were already planning, to try to do municipality and county priority at the same time, to try to bring those in together and see what we find. If there's anything else that you know now that you're interested in, this is a great time to tell us. And otherwise,
play with the population deviation.
Yep, that was the second thing.
And then another on that same sort of line. Do you think we ought to, as a commission, like focus on the assembly, thinking that by having sort of a good assembly focus, it'll be easy to nest and create the Senate districts? Or do you think we ought to be thinking about both?
Yeah, I would love to see you trying your hand at drawing both and asking us for examples for both, because I think you might, I think I mentioned this a few weeks ago. It seems like it could be a good exercise to have some of you drawing Senate plans, other ones of you splitting those down into assembly plans. Some of you will draw assembly plans, other ones of you will group those up into Senate plans. And I really think you can go back and forth at your two levels of nesting. The reason we've been focused on making assembly plans is I think those are the most intimidating to draw by hand. We're here to kick off the runs that would be of interest to you.
And so just a final question for me, the questions that we presented to you tonight, we might get answers on in a week or so, or 2 weeks.
Yeah, so we've got, I think, 3 people now who are up and running different kinds of Wisconsin chain runs. These are called Markov chains, the process that we use to make these. And so the turnaround time typically is a few days on any particular question. Some things turn out to be more challenging, so we had to really wrestle with that municipality shapefile to get it to play nice with the algorithms. But as you see, we got that running now. So the typical turnaround time on a request would be a few days.
Thank you.
It may be helpful just in looking at the sort of the heat maps that we've gotten for COI coverage. Once we get that municipality, when we get those preliminary maps, it may be good to reach out to those areas that we have a void in the heat map, just to kind of say, are there any communities that we need to look into that are contrary to what these preliminary maps show? So
totally agreed. And incidentally, I wanted to mention, one of you, maybe it was Ben, mentioned earlier that when it comes to splitting the municipalities, some will be more important than others. Some will be cited more by members of the public than others. That's also something that can be taken into account. If you want to pick several municipalities to prioritize, it's not all or nothing. And as the community of interest process matures and you start to identify communities that may not be municipalities themselves, if you want those kept whole, that's another thing that we can fold in.
One other thing, Moon, thinking back to the data you showed us around the sample maps,
Mhm.
I noticed there was data around party lean
Mhm.
and the like goal. There was like the count, or sorry, the row where it was like the ideal type, the ideal map, and all of them still leaned Republican.
If you
What?
ask, we'll initiate a search that tries to seek out the most proportional map we can find. That
Yeah, I
hasn't.
think I think that would be interesting just to see what that does to all the other numbers.
You bet.
Also, for the public, I can imagine folks being like, they didn't even look at a sample map that didn't already lean Republican, you know, and it could be because, well, I think we've talked about in the past, there's some like self gerrymandering through the demographics of the state of Wisconsin and the concentration of Democrats in the large cities, right? And so that could be a good explainer, but that could be helpful to see.
You bet.
Thank you.
I wanted to
Just
just
on
jump
the-
in. Oh, go ahead, Anne Marie. I'm sorry.
On the
I don't want
phone
to
line-
cut off conversation. So
Yeah, well, this is a little bit aside. There's a little bit of a rumor going around that the data that will be released on the 16th of August might not be in good shape, and there might be some sort of delay. And I don't know if that's particular to states or what. It's just a rumor some people have asked me about, and I haven't heard that. And I just wondered if you had heard anything.
No, to the contrary. The redistricting office at the Census Bureau has promised full and final numbers on August 16th. So everything I've heard and I think the promise is in writing in court filings. Everything I've heard indicates you'll be getting the full and final numbers on August 16th.
Thanks.
I know we're still working on like the software is what I read for like the raw data will be out, but then maybe
That's right.
Heard Emery, maybe the software, like the interface may not be in tip top shape, but yeah.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. There's the census.gov has a browser based tool for exploring the numbers that won't be ready till late September. But the numbers, the database is full and final on August 16th is my understanding.
So thanks for that clarification.
One last thing, I know we're running close on time. The sample maps, the 8 sample maps you provided and that are accessible, you showed us like how they differed from each other in terms of what they emphasize. That's going to be accessible on that same web page, so that like if somebody's like, oh, what's the difference between sample map 1 and 4, I can just click on this other link to see.
I could put the summary table up on the website if you think that would be helpful. I'd be happy to do that.
I think it would be like, yeah, it would be helpful because I already don't remember what was what.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll make a note. I remember nothing if I don't write it down. Post table, yes.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I was just going to jump in before we all get off today and just tell you a little from our end. First of all, as Moon's alluded to a bunch, and I said a little earlier, it's a highest priority to get a map drawer so that the process is ready to go around the time the census comes out, which means the map drawer will have to be in place weeks before that, which means it's very important and our highest priority. The other thing I'd say is that we post census data, so post August 16th-ish or 15th-ish, we will obviously have more meetings. I'm going to next week get a doodle poll to all of you and then turn that around very quickly to try to figure out what we're doing, when we're doing it, because I know that you guys, a feature and a sometimes drawback of this committee is that all of you guys this is not your full-time job. So we appreciate that, and we're trying to plan as much as we can in advance. Otherwise, we also have Molly Vidal, who was our previous communications person that assisted us, has been replaced at DOA, and I was talking to her, the person she works for, and we're going to sit down with them and make sure they're available for. I think it's going to be a lot more of a crucial time in the coming maybe month and a half when we need to have somebody giving us a little more attention. So just wanted to give you guys those updates before we were off the call and make sure you knew that we're not ignoring any of those 3 things. So otherwise, that's it from me.
Awesome, guys. Any other questions for Liz or for Moon before we sign off here? All right. Well, it looks like our next formal meeting as a group will be in August. I get August 8th here. And so, but be on the lookout for the doodles and all the links that we're getting, hopefully weekly, bi-weekly as well from the lab. And we'll kind of go from there, guys. So thanks everybody for coming out, and glad everybody could make it and ask their questions. And it looks like we're going in the right direction here. So
Thank you.
thank you.
everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you so
everybody.
much, Moon and team.
Thanks, guys.
Everyone.